Hey everybody, and welcome to this Vassals of Kingsgrave episode covering HBO's series The Plot Against America, based on the Philip Roth novel of the same name released in 2004. On this episode, we will clearly spoil anything from the book or the show. My name is Bina007, and I will be your host today, and I am joined by Adam.
Hey, this is Adam, DrownedSnow on the forums.
By Jock.
Hello, Manlo Jock here on the forums.
By Greg.
Hello, this is Greg, ClaudiusTheFool on the forums.
By Abby.
Hi, this is Abby, DarceyMormont on the forums.
And we may or may not be joined by Varley later on in the podcast. So let's start off in the time-honoured fashion by giving a rating, either on the show or the book or both, a lemon cake rating.
I think we should do hollow bread rating instead of lemon cake rating, or maybe gefilte fish rating.
Absolutely.
It's okay.
Whatever.
I'm half Jewish.
Appropriate.
Although they make a big deal in the book that they don't keep a kosher house, right? So
No, I know.
when he goes off to
Neither of
eat,
those things are kosher.
yeah, also true.
There was a lot of good bakery scenes in this TV show, and they made me want
when they
my
go to the Jewish
grandma's
patisserie,
cooking.
yeah, and they just that really awful Abe Steinem just corners the deli for all the good sweets, and you're just like, oh, okay. So what are we doing, gefilte fish, or can we do something bakery?
Well, gefilte fish is gross, so let's not.
Once
do
a year,
gefilte
it's
fish.
okay.
Lindbergh babies? I don't know.
Hey.
I'm
Varley
in touch.
Varley, welcome.
Sorry I was late, even though you guys pushed it back for me.
That's okay.
Acceptable.
Okay, Adam, how many Lindbergh babies out of 5 do you give the series and or book, if you have read it?
I kind of skimmed some notes on the book. I haven't actually read the book, but I did watch the show. I give it a 4 out of 5, I think. The pandemic mindset obviously wasn't, I don't know, probably might change my viewpoint. But I watched it, I don't know, maybe sometime last week, 10 days ago, something like that. And I know I'd seen the previews for a while on HBO, and it looked interesting. And I was like, I don't know if I want to get into this or not. I didn't really know enough about it, and I was just looking for something. And I watched the first episode, and I was like, oh, okay, so this is what's going on. And then I think I watched them all in, I don't know, however many hours it takes to watch all the episodes. Because I've been doing overnights at work, so sitting around dead, binging stuff. I don't know. It definitely was anxiety inducing a little bit, because most of the time in my head is like, is this all it takes? Is this all it would have taken? Really? Probably way more than I would have normally, given everything that's going on. So
Yeah. How about you, Jock? How many Lindbergh babies out of 5 would you give this?
I think 3 out of 5. My problems with him were sort of intrinsic to it, where it was slow at points, but just because it's a self-insert where the self-insert is a child.
Yeah,
So,
no, I think that's legitimate, and I think a lot of people reading the book, which is far more anchored to the little boy, would have had that same criticism. How about you, Greg? What do you make of book and show?
I enjoyed the show. I'd probably overall give it a 4. The book I had problems with because I read it when it first came out, and I was in the middle of just being obsessed with alternate history. I was reading Harry Turtledove and Robert Conroy and all these I was reading nothing but alternate history for a huge, a couple years. And when this came out, I was like, oh, a real author is a literary author is getting his foot in sci-fi alternate history. And I thought he kind of didn't stick the landing. We talked a little bit in the chat, but I think Abby mentioned it too, that the ending of the book was very rushed, and the show kind of ended a little before the book ends, which I think was a smart decision. But I had problems with I have other authors. I think I've even mentioned it before, where when a real author with quotes decides to write an alternate history book, and they all kind of follow a pattern where they have a smart concept, it's a really cool story, and then by the end of the book, everything's back to normal. It's I told you a thing, but I couldn't stick with it. I had to get it back to the real world, and that's what happens in the book, where we're doing spoilers, so FDR gets reelected, Pearl Harbor happens a year later or 2 years later, and it's just this weird kind of thing. But the whole Lindbergh baby stuff was very confusing in the book, and it was probably just as confusing in the show. Yeah. But it was shot very well. I loved the actors. I thought they were all cast very well. The kid that played Sandy, he was so perfect because I just wanted to slap him the whole time until he realized it was that's exactly how I felt when I was reading the book. Why can't you see what your father's trying to protect you from? But no, I really liked it. It was very evocative, very resonant, and very unsettling for anyone who has Jewish ancestors. Be like Adam was saying, like, oh, is this all it takes? Like, for thousands of years, it was
don't
just
think
like,
you even need to
oh.
be someone with Jewish ancestors. I mean, when I watched the Washington D.C. scene, I could barely sleep afterwards, and it's just anyone who's other, anyone who feels, and it was that same feeling. Could we go on a holiday? Could my suitcases be put in the hall? Oh, menacing. How about you, Abby? What did you make of it, book and show? If you've done both or neither, I don't know.
Yeah, so I read the book in 2017, and I found my Goodreads review for it. So basically I'm gonna kind of echo what Greg said. Like, I did not like the end of the book because it was so rushed, and like it didn't really fit the tone. And I had issues with the writing style too, according to my Goodreads review. But I would give the book probably like 3.5 stars, and then the show 4, because I liked the show a lot more. There were still some things I didn't like about it, but I think that it was like, it just resonated with me a lot more than the book for some reason, even though like the family dynamics were exactly the same. But I think just like seeing it acted out, because it reminded me a lot of my own family, because like I have an older brother who's very different in political concepts compared to my parents, and like my dad is like super, like reminds me so much of Herman. And then also this is very similar to like the way my grandparents grew up, because my family's from Chicago, but like we're extremely secular, like basically non-observant Jews. And so like I could like totally picture this just like happening to my grandfather and like his family and stuff. So it's definitely resonated with me a lot more.
Tough, yeah. And then last but not least, Varley Mo Varley.
I didn't read the book. I have watched all the show, obviously. I'd give it 4 Lindbergh babies. I enjoyed the show. The set design was amazing. I want to live in a Craftsman house so bad. Like you said, there are deeply unsettling parts of the show that obviously the big one for me was the Seldon call where his mom doesn't come home.
Oh,
but like
Jesus.
you said, Bina, like there's just like these little maybe not even microaggressions, but like there are like these little things that people are saying or doing that just like irk me so bad. Like, and yeah, it was very unsettling. It did remind me, and this is going to be like the second dollop reference I've been telling the people to go listen to. The first one being the Marblehead smallpox riots, and that's very applicable to our current time. But for this show, it reminded me of the Business Plot. Do you guys remember that? Where a group of conservative business leaders wanted to set up a fascist government in the U.S.?
Nope.
Oh yeah,
I missed that one.
That was like 2 years ago, or it was yeah.
Is this a real world event, or is this a
Yes,
book? Like, what is this?
It is a real, the Dollop's a comedy podcast, but they do stories from American history. And basically in the 30s, if I'm remembering this correctly, like a bunch of veterans that weren't paid marched on Washington under the guise of trying to get this guy like Schmedley or Butler or something like that into power.
Smedley Butler, yeah, I know. He was the general. He was, yeah, okay. I forgot about the fascist stuff that comes later, but
basically a bunch of, people like Henry Ford were like backing this, run for government, to lead the government against FDR. And it reminded me of that. And it's deeply unsettling because I feel like at any point, Bina may sound like she's like, this is all it takes. Well, I feel like it is all it takes. You see people acting like idiots now, and, and it is because they're other. Like, I think that there could be a point in the near future where just by having an out-of-state license plate will bring extra scrutiny onto you.
Ugh. Okay. Well, I watched the show as it was airing, so we watched it week by week, and we made the decision to do that. Like, sometimes we wait till the whole show's out and then we'll watch it, but it was so unsettling and so intense that I only wanted to watch it one a week. I would give it a 5 out of 5. There's nothing in it I would change, even though the first episode was very slow and in keeping with the book. And it's only when you've watched the whole thing you realize how masterful that is, because it's that slow, unsettling creep of the craziness. The book, I would dock a point. I still think it's a good book, but there are issues with the tone. The ending, we'll get into that when we discuss the final episode. And also, obviously, the show has the benefit of broadening out the perspective from the little boy and giving certain characters, I think, more of a fair shake. People like Evelyn, I think, do better in the show than in the book, and probably Alvin too, in a way. So So let's start off with the paterfamilias, Herman Levin. So the Roth family in the book, it's all named after Philip Roth's family, and the little boy is Philip Roth. But it was changed to the Levin family. Apparently, the director David Simon had a conversation with the author, and the author was completely supportive of the TV show, but just said, look, because you're going to put your own spin on it, and I don't have complete control, out of respect, can you just change the name of the family, which was kind of interesting to me. So let's start off with Herman Levin, who's played by Morgan Spector, who's really, I would say, more of a theatre actor, but I thought was tremendous. He plays an insurance agent. He's doing pretty well. He lives with his family in a rented apartment. He's a New Deal socialist. He's a big fan of FDR. He's a huge fan of Walter Winchell, one of those classic dads who sits by the radio and spouts opinions, but is, just a successful insurance agent. And as we meet him, he has his wife, he's got his 2 kids, and in the extended family is his sister-in-law, Evelyn, and his nephew, Alvin, who are all kind of in one way or another under his care. I love this actor, and I think this would be me, like the person who clings on to a belief in the Republic, even when all evidence is against you. He has such a tragic faith in institutions, in the law, in the police, in the good, in democracy itself. And the way I was trying to explain it to my husband is that I'm also a second-generation immigrant. And I think we second-generation immigrants have a romantic view of our country that our parents give us, because they've usually come from somewhere that didn't have those founding benefits of democracy and rule of law, and they've made it. It's kind of the American dream, and I feel I would be him. I feel I would be the guy who wanted to cling on to this belief and who wouldn't be run out of town, because this is my country. And so I thought he was tremendous. How do you guys feel about Herman Levin?
Like I said earlier, he reminds me so much of my dad. Like, watching him just made me so frustrated, because it made me think of when I got frustrated, because obviously, like, I read this book basically like right after Trump got elected and stuff, and my family is extremely like anti-Trump, and just being in the house with my parents, because I was still in high school, was the worst thing ever, because it was just nonstop talking about politics, like every minute of every day, the news always on. And so just watching his wife get so fed up with him, just continuously talking about politics and just not doing anything, was just like, I just was relating so hard to that. And I was like, this man is my dad. Like, he is my dad. He just complains, but doesn't do anything regarding the, like, trying to change it or anything. He's just like, well, everything is fucked. Everyone hates the Jews. Everyone's always hated the Jews. We can't do anything about it. The end.
What I like about him, though, is that he does, on 2 occasions, so very early on in that first episode when they all go to Union City because he's been offered a promotion, and his wife, played by Zoe Kazan so beautifully, gives him this impassioned speech about what it's like to be the only Jewish girl in school in a non-Jewish neighborhood. And he does turn down the promotion, which I thought was really amazing. And then again, when they're being threatened to be sent off to the middle of the country to Kentucky and under Homestead 42, he gives up his good job to become a manual laborer to save his family. So I kind of like that about him. And I also like the fact that by the end, when he realizes that she was right and they should have gone to Canada, he actually says it. And I think for a certain man, a certain sort of head of family of that era, that was quite a big deal to have that humility.
I agree with what you and Abby have said, and I think that the dynamic between him and Alvin is maybe the most like important of the entire show, and the most interesting to me was that you can sit there and complain and yell at the radio, whereas Alvin's like a take action, regardless of the legality of those actions.
But is that a fair comparison, though? Because Alvin has no responsibilities. Like Herman can't go off and join the war. And that's why that final argument, that horrible argument between Herman and Alvin, I think is really tough.
Well, I think Alvin does, because he really, knows that the 2 younger cousins look up to him. So I think he does realize he has a responsibility to them, and that's why he wants to go and fight.
And we see Herman like develop after that fight because he's out there campaigning for Roosevelt and stuff. So like, but he realizes like there are actual things that he can do. Like you don't have to go off to war to make a difference. Like you can, campaign, you can protest, you can do things that don't put your family in danger and don't or that don't cause you to like have to leave your family. Like there are other options, and I think that he like realizes that after the fight.
But he's like every guy, like, I'll use myself as an example. I feel like because I go out to vote, because I, put money into my 401k because I do everything right. Like I look at like what just happened. I'm like, well, what are we supposed to do? Like, if you do everything you're supposed to and be a good citizen, like, shouldn't you be up on top? Like, why is everything in the shit right now?
That's Herman, right? He's like,
fair,
he doesn't get it. He's quite naive. He thinks if you tick the boxes, if you pay your taxes, if you're a good neighbor, if you keep yourself to yourself, surely America is the place where you can succeed. And this whole book and thing is just the disillusionment of Herman and then of Alvin in kind of different ways. I think what's really interesting, if you want to contrast the book and the TV show, is that in the TV show, when he finally has that confrontation with Alvin, and Alvin's saying, "What did you ever do?" But we as the viewer know he's gone to rescue Seldon, which actually was incredibly brave. Yeah. But in the book, that happens after the argument. So in the book, Alvin's actually kind of right in a way. And Philip Roth is actually being harsher. He's actually being harsher on... Because actually, I got to the argument in the book. I reread the book after the TV show, and I was like, oh, does he not go to rescue Seldon then in the book? And then it happens really right at the very end in that compressed ending. So to that extent, Alvin in his kind of cynical post-injury state is actually kind of more justified. Well, even in the TV show, because he doesn't really know what's happened. So, yeah. Anything else on Herman Levin?
I kept expecting him to jump in an X-Wing and fly away because he looks exactly like Oscar Isaacs.
Brilliant. Yeah.
But he definitely did have that very that theater presence, like almost like he was part of like a old radio drama or something, which I think worked really well.
He's perfectly cast. He looks like someone from the 1940s. He doesn't have a modern look at all.
His pants, they all wore their pants so high. So high.
And you could smoke anywhere.
The suspenders on.
I focus on the height of the pants, and Matt's focused on the drinking and smoking. Tells you about us.
The only thing I was going to say about Herman in sort of book relative to show that surprised me is that I guess in the show you do kind of see the elder brother who has the fruit packing business, but you don't realize the contrast. Like in the book, it's made very clear that his other brothers are much more money minded and all live in swanky houses in more middle class neighborhoods. And that, Herman as the guy who's still renting the flat has been left behind. Like his principles, his refusal to do that kind of work has left him behind, which I thought was interesting and an aspect we didn't really get in the show.
We're just watching Aquafina from Queens, and David Krumholtz, who plays Monty Levin, was a coke snorting bogus event promoter. So it was weird to see him in two different things.
He's another actor I love.
Bernard the Elf from the Santa Claus. That's his iconic role.
He's a great actor. Anyway, you go, Abby.
Yeah, so I actually really liked. Sorry, I wanted to mention this when you mentioned the last name change, because I thought it actually was helped a lot with the show, because I really liked that they changed the last name to Levin, or I might accidentally call them Levin because I know so many people with last name Levin and spell the same. Anyways, or Levine. But like, just because that is a super Jewish last name, because they're part of the Levi tribe. Like, it's very Jewish, and I think that is actually like they bring that up in the show, because I don't think Roth would really be associated that much with being Jewish, and so like in the show they talk like, oh, like I could tell you're Jewish by your last name, and I think that's something really important, because like Judaism a lot of the time is a non-visible minority unless you're like Orthodox. And so like because I have an extremely Jewish last name, and like my brother is always like, I want to change my last name so people just don't know, because, and I think that was like, I think changing the last name was also just like to something more Jewish, just like kind of helped to illustrate the fact that like this is like they can't assimilate to the extent that the rest of America wants them to, just because they'll always like have this heritage, and like no matter how much.
There are a couple scenes though where like people just look at them and are like, oh, Jewish. Yeah, which I was like, how do they know?
There's a really interesting scene in the book where young Philip's with his mum on the bus when he's gone to visit Aunt Evelyn, and he suddenly realizes for the first time when he looks at his mum objectively that she looks very Jewish, which I thought was really interesting. The first time you realize that you really are other. But the point, I mean, like David Simon was very clear on this, and Philip Roth apparently was very clear to David Simon that these are not Orthodox Jews. These are not people who are going around with looking incredibly different. Yes, they're different because they're Jewish, but they have assimilated. So the whole we'll get into Bengelsdorf, but the whole idea that they need to work harder and become more American, that they're going as fast as any immigrant group can, and you shouldn't expect them, and they shouldn't be required to go faster. That these aren't Orthodox Jews. These are pretty assimilated Jews already, even if the
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, no matter how reform, how secular, like my family, we're non-observant. Like I never went to shul my entire life until like I started university. Like it doesn't matter because I look Jewish. I have a Jewish last name. It's like, it doesn't matter. And so like you can be completely assimilated and it's still like, there'll be ways that people want to try to find you as other, even though you're basically completely assimilated.
Yeah.
And so I just thought the last name change was very like evident of that.
Yeah, which is a very good point. And actually, I mean, in a way, you can view this TV show and book as a story of delusion, men living with the consequences of their delusions. So with Herman, it was the belief in the Republic, which you can argue is or isn't restored by the end. Maybe we'll go to Alvin next, because we've talked about him so much in contrast. So Alvin, for those of you, if you haven't watched it, is the nephew. He's got the reputation of just being a bit of a ne'er-do-well. Can't really hold down a job, didn't do well in school, gets into fights, gets sacked from jobs that his uncle keeps trying to get for him. But basically, fundamentally, I think we're meant to think he's a good kid. Signs up to fight against Hitler for the Canadians, so gets shot, loses a leg, comes back a much more cynical man, and eventually sort of gets engaged to the daughter of the pinball king of Philadelphia. So goes from being ultimately an ultra principled to being incredibly cynical. He just wants to be the big man, the rich man. He believes he's lost his leg for no reason. The country's gone and it's just about making money. And that brings him, even at the end, into confrontation with Herman. So that by the end of this, all the kind of non-core members of the family have had to be shed so that the family can endure. So Alvin and Herman fall out. How did you like the performance of Anthony Boyle, a Northern Irish Catholic, as Alvin Levin?
I was so surprised to find out that he was Irish, and I was like, I thought he was Jewish. I Googled him, and I was like, wait, that's Anthony Boyle. Like, I didn't even recognize him. I thought he was Jewish. I was very surprised.
I had just seen him in Tolkien, so I was like, hey, this guy.
Yeah, apparently when he went up for the role, and David Simon was kind of like trying to cast Jewish actors and obviously didn't for everyone. And when he said he was a Catholic growing up in Northern Ireland, he's like, don't worry, that's Jewish enough. In other words, if you've grown up as a minority in a that gives you that. But I think it's a really great performance. I'd never heard of him before, but
he was Scorpius in Cursed Child. How could you not know that?
Which is weird because I actually saw that in the West End, but yeah, obviously didn't recognize him.
Is that the 8th book that Casey says I'm not allowed to read?
It doesn't exist.
Not canon. I really enjoyed it. Controversial.
I've heard that the actual performance is amazing. So
yeah, it's one of the most stunning bits of theatre I've ever seen. Yeah. So Alvin, I have to confess, I started off really loving Alvin, and I really thought he was going to end up turning out to be the lovable rogue. But by the end, he was the one I wanted to slap by the end.
Yep. I had pretty much the exact same impression of him. And one thing, when you called him a ne'er-do-well for the last 2 minutes, I'm like, what is a nerdy-well? I'm like, do I not know what a nerdy-well is? And then I realized you said ne'er-do-well. And that's all I was thinking about while you guys were talking.
God, Greg.
So we can say Nerdywells from now on. Like, he's a nerdy-well.
Godspot.
Brilliant. Did any of you sympathise more? I mean, I suppose there's a way in which one could sympathise with him and think, well, he lost his leg, no wonder. Any of you come out of it, liking Alvin or understanding him at least?
I understood him.
I didn't hate him, but at the end I was like upset that they got into that fight, but I wasn't like, oh, he's the scum of the earth now. Like I was just like, I don't know, I didn't hate him, and I don't know.
I mean, even by the end, I was tired of Herman's kind of, oh, here we go again. Like, just let it go. Have a nice dinner. Like, really, we're doing this again? Like, I was tired of that as a viewer. So, like, in this family, I can imagine how Alvin would be tired of it as well. Even though he was right. Like, I agreed with everything Herman was saying. Like,
Yeah.
did not have to have that fight. Was not going to change his mind. You know, like, I don't think he would have. And he didn't.
I felt that, like, right up until that fight, like, I was on board. Like, he hadn't really, I don't know. It was kind of a quick turn, and I was like, well, that's unfortunate that he's going that way. But, there's still time.
I found it, like I said, I really liked the dynamic between the father and Alvin. But I think it also plays on this idea of America and what the actual title means. Like, one guy's just like, yeah, he's a good citizen. Like, he watches out for his family, whatever. Alvin's like, you got to hustle. You got to make the money. And, those are two ways to achieve, like, the American dream. And both are, fine. But it's just two ways to do it. And I think he played that really well.
It was
who has a friend named Smushy?
I know. It was just tragic to me. Like, I think both of their journeys are tragic. I mean, Herman's journey to cynicism about his own country is very tragic, and one that I probably should experience myself to grow up in terms of my relationship with my country. And I think that Alvin's is even more tragic. Like, to go from those ideals to being so cynical and so hard, I don't know. I found it really hard to stomach. Like, at the end when he's just the big man in that really flashy suit, and it's kind of like maybe a product of the 1940s where you feel if Alvin only understood what Herman had been through to rescue Seldon and what his enlightenment, and if Herman could only really truly understand what Alvin had been through in the war and with his leg, maybe they could actually still be friends. But okay, so let's go through maybe back to Zoe Kazan as Elizabeth Bess Levin. I think David Simon, when he met Zoe Kazan, believed she was Jewish, but she's actually Turkish and not Jewish. And he was like, well, that's Jewish enough in terms of being othered. I think she's one of the most articulate, intelligent actresses and writers in Hollywood. So she's the reason I really wanted to watch this show. I think her performance was tremendous. Philip Roth clearly has this thing about his mum. He writes these idealized mothers. I don't have much else to say other than she's so caring, so wise, the glue that holds the family together. I love the marriage. I love the relationship between husband and wife. Like, they may disagree, but there's no recrimination.
Yeah.
So if I can plug yet another podcast, it would be Fresh Air's interview, Terry Gross interviewing Zoe Kazan.
Yes.
Where they discuss this role, and especially the role her grandfather played during the McCarthy hearing, where he actually named names, and how that kind of played into the overall, kind of atmosphere of this show and how she used that. It was really interesting. It was a good listen. I'd recommend to you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also recommend there's an official HBO podcast that accompanies the show, a bit like the one with Chernobyl, where where Peter Sagal interviews David Simon episode by episode, and it gives you a lot of insight.
Oh, cool. I'll check.
Yeah, I listened to the first and the
Peter
last
Sagal's
one of
really
those. I
good
thought they were pretty good.
Yeah. So anything I'll try and drop in knowledge from that when I can, but it's really worth a listen. What I loved about Bess is that she's just the kind of standard. She's my mum, right? My mum was the homemaker that kept the spirit of the home, kept everyone fed, worked hard. Seemed like she was just all about love and empathy and sympathy. And then as the show goes on, Bess seems to become stronger and stronger to the point where, when Sandy comes back and calls them ghetto Jews and she just slaps him. That was a shock. That was a real shock. And then finally, when Evelyn comes back and wants to take shelter in the house, I really thought that Bess was going to cave and take her in. And I would have taken her in. I would have forgiven Evelyn and taken her in. And the strength of Bess to just say, I love you, but I will never forgive you.
away.
And I'm going to keep my family, aka the four of us. You're no longer part of it. I have no responsibility for you. She ends up, I mean, if Herman is kind of broken and disillusioned by the end, as is Alvin, Bess just finds herself. I mean, it's not really a character arc. It's just a straight line arrow to strength as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And her, the way she handled the phone call with Seldon, like that scene was one of the most like powerful scenes because it was just a phone call with her, but like you also as a viewer, you want to know like, okay, there's gunshots in the background, what's going on? But like you're so drawn into her just make some Rice Krispies. Do you have some milk? Like, and like I felt like she was talking me down like as I was watching. I felt so much better by the end of it.
I feel like I need her as my mum in this crisis. I really do. What's amazing actually is reading the book straight after watching that final episode. All the dialogue is basically from the book. It's incredibly faithful, and that scene's as written, but it echoes an earlier scene where young Philip gets locked in Seldon's bathroom, or thinks he's locked in it, and Seldon's mum talks him down in kind of the same way. So you kind of feel that there's the mums of Summit Avenue as maybe seen as kind of trivial and sort of inconsequential people are just the wisest and most wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's really just the glue that held that whole family together, and like you said, she just develops strength over time. She finally tells her husband fucking, what's what, and as you said before, he finally mans up at the end and said, "Yeah, you were right. We should have done that."
Which takes a lot. The one moment I really love about her is when she's been on the phone with Seldon, and she makes eye contact with her husband. She just glances at her youngest son, Philip, and says to the husband, "We have some responsibility to Seldon." And then, like, she doesn't need to say any more. Like, he knows he has to go rescue Seldon because she's figured out that her son basically got Seldon sent to Kentucky. I mean, she's so smart. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about her. I just think she's tremendous. I think Zoe Kazan, if there are Emmys or whatever, just needs to get all the awards.
I also did love her in Buster Scruggs. She was in my favorite little story in that. I forgot the name that she played, but she was very good in that as well.
The interview I heard with her is like, why do you keep on getting cast as like a person from the 30s and 40s?
Well, that was 1870s, but yes, I see your point.
Yeah, but she is tremendous, I think. Okay, so let us contrast the wonderful Bess with her elder sister, Evelyn Finkel, played by Winona Ryder, who actually is half Jewish and very proud, apparently, of her Jewish heritage. And a key change from the book is that in the book she's the younger sister, and in the TV show she's the older sister, partly because they wanted to cast Winona Ryder, but also partly because I think it makes her situation maybe more understandable. Like, I come from a culture where, like in the Asian culture, which still wants to marry off people, there's a pressure to marry. So if you were an older sister and your younger sister was already married with kids, you would be very much seen as a social failure. So the idea that when she starts off, she's dating a married Italian guy who she clearly can't bring home to mother. And then when she finally bags this guy, he may be old and he may be controversial, but he's a rabbi. So finally I have someone I can bring home to mother, and like, it doesn't get better than a rabbi. I felt for her in going from being kind of like socially a failure to suddenly little Evelyn Finkel is at the White House.
I think that role inversion from like older to younger sister, which may not seem like a lot, I think it's actually really effective because it also brings up at the end when her sister stands up to her. It adds an extra little period onto that, I think.
Yeah, I think maybe the switch, even though I didn't read the book, is effective because there is always this agitation and that she's the older sister. She should know better. She should be able to see what the fuck is going on, and she can't.
Right, and it gets away from the trope of like, oh, you're the baby child that's just irresponsible, and
Yeah. She reminds me a bit of a like Jewish Scarlett O'Hara, who probably, when she was young and she's, very pretty as a very young girl, probably had lots of men on her, like after her, but kind of was a bit too tricky and tried to play them off against each other, and then just ended up with no one by accident, and one day realizes she's 35. And I don't know, I do find her very sympathetic. I have to say my husband really hated the character, but also really hated Winona Ryder's performance, but I thought the performance, he found it too vacuous, but I thought it was meant to be vacuous. I mean, I thought it was so spot on, and yeah.
I wish I was 35.
Yeah.
I am 35, and I don't know, like, it's okay.
Yeah, but it's not okay. It wouldn't have been okay in the 1940s if you were a Jewish woman, I guess.
No, I know.
Of that era.
You'd literally be middle-aged.
How far do you think by the end Evelyn gets the difficulty or gets the problematic nature of what is happening to the Jews?
I don't think she got it until that, like, the wedding.
Until they were arrested.
The party.
Right.
The party at. Well, I think she got it first a little bit at the party at the White House when she's like, "Oh, maybe it's not the best thing in the world that I'm dancing with the Nazi foreign minister." And then, shortly afterwards, when something goes wrong, blame the Jews. Like,
right.
Yeah, okay.
When Henry Ford's like, down south, you guys would be handling the N-words. And I was like, whoa.
But her phrase, that is one of my favorites. I can never say it. Is it Gafen Yam? It just means go shit in the ocean. That's one of my favorite Yiddish slurs as well.
So how much did she know? Like at the end when she's like sort of saying that Lindbergh baby kidnapping story, has she genuinely gone delusional?
Well, in the book, that's what happened. That's true, though, right? That's what we're meant to believe.
No, we're not. No, we're not.
Hold on, I'm confused.
Hold on.
I read the book.
No, I thought when I read the book, that's what the answer was that his baby was kidnapped.
And he's been like a puppet of the Nazis because they have his son.
Yeah.
So Philip, no. So
Philip
Philip Roth said to David Simon, "I wrote the book, and I wanted. It definitely is the case in the book that Lindbergh was an anti-Semite and was not a nice man and took America down a bad path. And I wanted to create a kind of conspiracy hoax at the end because, obviously if Trump loses an election, his base is going to say it was stolen. Like people will always have a justifying excuse for their guy. And so he created the Lindbergh baby thing and put it in the mouth of Evelyn. But that wasn't meant to be the reality. And it has bugged him ever since that people think it was.
Well, that goes
And what's
not
even worse is that people in the real world now think that Lindbergh was only anti-Semitic because Lindbergh baby's kidnapped.
Well,
and he's
wait a minute, what?
Dumbasses.
And he said, to David
was he
Simon,
anti-Semitic in real life. Like,
yes.
I don't know
So
enough about that.
Yeah, he was a piece of shit.
The speech
So Philip
real.
Roth said to David Simon, make sure that at the end of your show, no one thinks this shit was real, and that it's
He
just.
failed at that.
He's Lucky Lindy.
Wait a minute. So, okay, the show, and I didn't read the book. The show, I thought that she was just doing a voiceover that, it could have been coming out of the radio, but we're hearing it from what's her name, Evelyn. That was.
I thought the idea was that that's what happened, but they wanted us to see no one was listening to her because she was so pathetic.
Yeah. The idea is that she can't handle the
thought that was the
truth
answer.
that her husband was nutty. She can't handle the truth that her husband backed the wrong camp and they did horrible things. So if they backed Lindbergh, and if Lindbergh was really a Nazi, that makes them complicit in Nazism. But if Lindbergh was really a nice guy who was being blackmailed, that gets them off the hook. And so Evelyn, in her head, to not go mad, has to make herself believe that they were part of something that wasn't evil. And
so what the fuck happened? What actually happened?
Okay, wait.
This is
My
the
question then
problem
is,
because
Okay, So this actually fixes a few things.
Oh my God.
So this would mean that the Canadians actually intercepted his plane and took him down, right?
in the show,
they did regime change in the show. Yeah.
In the show,
because otherwise, I'm like, wait, was he actually working? Were those like Nazis that actually did that? And he was, and like, Alvin was working with Nazis. Like, what happened? Like, I was a little confused by that bit at the end.
So in the book, it's just as, and this is the criticism that Greg and others would have, isn't it? That it's just a Deus Ex Machina, that we know he's had accidents in the past and he just literally disappears in the clouds. So the problem that has been introduced into history by Philip Roth, you can say he chickens out. He can't resolve it. So basically he just takes Lindbergh literally out of the story. And we never know what happens to him. And Alvin has nothing to do with it. And David Simon said to Philip Roth, this is problematic because people are going to know what happened to him. So therefore, rather than Alvin just being a normal private in the war, he makes him a radio specialist so that the Canadian/British can recruit him to try and help take Lindbergh out. But in the book, it's just, we don't know.
So his son didn't join the Hitler Youth?
The whole Lindbergh baby thing is bullshit. Lindbergh's baby died.
Okay, but my question is then, when was Evelyn told this lie, and how long was she perpetuating this lie, knowing that she was going against her own people, making their life, like knowing that the Nazis were trying to make life difficult for the Jews in America. Because obviously if she knew they were being blackmailed by the Nazis, then Lindbergh was doing something purposefully to, like, through blackmail or other means.
Oh, I don't think Evelyn knows anything. Like, literally, I think she's quite dumb. No offense to her. I think she's quite stupid. I think basically once her husband is arrested, that to me is the point at which Evelyn figures out that she's in danger, and that at that point, when there's a counter coup, and she has to justify it herself. She has to figure out how to justify it. So in the book, it's interesting that as a epilogue, her husband then writes a sort of an apology pro vita sua, like a sort of a little book about my time with Lindbergh. And he starts putting forward that theory because they're basically trying to get themselves out of trouble.
I understand that.
That's what I was thinking. Is he probably told her that?
Okay. That, but like, because to me it feels like she's still perpetuating these wrongdoings because she thinks, like, she would know there are things that are, she's perpetuating bad things, but she thinks that she has to do it because the Nazis are forcing them to, but why is she putting her family in danger?
I think Evelyn genuinely just thinks she's doing the right thing. I think in her head, Bengelsdorf is a wise and good Jew, and her hayseed relatives just don't understand like he does because he's so educated and so wise that they just should trust him because he knows what's best for them. And I think she believes that up until the final episode, when she sees him getting arrested and maybe has some doubts, and then she really loses it, right? You see her with her hair down in desperation go to her sister, and when she realizes that the sister's not going to take her in, she's stuck with Bengelsdorf, they're going to have to live out their purgatory together, then I think it's a convenient truth to believe that this whole thing, Lindbergh was really a good man. They weren't, because if she admits that Lindbergh wasn't a good man, she has to admit that her husband was taken in by Lindbergh. And he's the only thing she has left.
She should have realized it when they served shrimp at the presidential dinner. It's not kosher.
I remember reading the book, and this might be because I was not as critical reader or I misremember it, but I could have sworn there was a scene in the book in that last chapter where there was a radio report or something of Lindbergh showing up in Berlin with Hitler. In the show, they did that as it was a conspiracy thingy, but I remember that in the book as, okay, this happened. So that's why I assumed the whole thing was true.
No, well, I mean, maybe it's worth both of us having a reread because I remember
not doing that. But
I remember it more as again there was propaganda put out, right? Because all the far right people now have to sort of backtrack, right? But no, the only reason I say this with some confidence is listening to that episode 6 David Simon interview where they talk about the difference in the ending and him saying Philip Roth has been, it's kind of like he regrets inventing, because now far right nutters are, Charles Lindbergh has been, and they were trying to make it super, it's a bit like that rape scene in Game of Thrones.
Lindbergh did give that speech that started off the whole thing. That was a real speech
that
he gave.
The Des Moines speech is real.
Yeah.
Where he,
I just did not know that.
Yeah.
Lindbergh was a nasty
was a
piece of
horrible man.
shit, and his wife was far worse. I mean, what angered me is that his wife came off as better.
I have so many. Yeah, well, that's also, we sell so many copies of Gift from the Sea. It's
Do
like,
you?
I need this you have copies of Gifts from the Sea. I'm like, fine, here, just read The Prophet instead.
What is that? What is that, Greg?
It's like this little, like, tchotchke kind of like blessings of nature and the world, and isn't it great to be an American and love? It's a little book that she wrote, Anna Morrow Lindbergh, in like the 50s. Yeah. It's like a book that everybody gives everyone for their
I remember
graduation.
hearing about like racist Lindbergh and stuff, and I guess I just thought it was a different Lindbergh.
No. So what happened is, here's a bit of Lindbergh history. In fact, maybe we should do a volop on Lindbergh. So after the whole Lindbergh baby kidnapping, they had so much publicity that they went to live in a village in England for much of the 1930s. And Lindbergh, on behalf of the US government, his first trip went to Germany to sort of ascertain what they were doing with their remilitarization. And then after that, he made another 2 trips and on his own back and saw...
So he got radicalized.
He saw the rise of Hitler as very much a good thing, as did his wife. They have glowing diary entries and speeches. Yeah. And then he
got that medal, right?
Yeah, and he got the Iron Cross, for fuck's sake. And then he goes back to America. And he was very much agitating for America to keep out of the war. in his Des Moines speech. This is September 11th, 1941, so this is when Hitler has overrun much of Europe. The three most important groups who have been pressing this country toward war are the British, the Jewish, and the Roosevelt administration. And, he did not see the Jews as Americans. And he was considering a presidential run. And there was, in fact, a lot of criticism of Roosevelt, even on the left, for considering a third term. People didn't do 3 terms necessarily. So it's all, if you read the book, well, my copy of the book, I think Philip Roth has this sort of the real biographies of the people. So all through their marriage, Anne-Marie Lindbergh had written books like covering his flights. But she was as anti-Semitic as him. And the only thing that kind of stuck in my throat was seeing her as kind of the savior of the counter coup, because in the book and the show, it's her giving that big speech when she's busted out of the mental asylum and calling for the election that brings this all to a close. And I just thought it kind of makes her seem more heroic than I think she has any right to be seen as. Yeah. And that pisses me off. Lindbergh was a piece of shit. He wasn't as much of a piece of shit as Henry Ford, who, with his own money, had copies of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion printed and handed out for free.
He printed an anti-Semitic newspaper. He ran a newspaper that was literally just the Jews are terrible. He was horrible.
So, yeah, for the business plot, it wasn't actually Henry Ford, even though he might have been a part of it. It was mainly Prescott Bush. So
where do you guys come out on Evelyn at the end? Do you think she's learned anything? Do you like her?
I feel bad for her because she's I don't know how to explain this, but maybe it's just because I don't know, because it's she and her husband represent this idea that if one person speaks on behalf of an entire group, then everything that is okay. And so I feel like she, I don't know, she doesn't take as not she okay, this just popped into my head, so this might not be a good thought, but because I also don't have anything against intermarriage at all, I'm really whatever, but she obviously is very not connected to her Judaism because she was dating a non-Jew and didn't care, whatever. So she is not connected to her Judaism in the way that the rest of her family is. And she sees herself as just completely American. In her family, they say they see themselves as completely American, but they also identify as Jewish. And that is I'm not saying holding them back, but it is something that is they do still identify as Jewish. And so the fact that she basically holds no regard for her Judaism kind of allows her to be oh, well, the things that are happening around me, it doesn't affect me. And
one of the funniest scenes is when she goes to the synagogue and she clearly doesn't know the words of what to do. And she's trying to impress her new boyfriend who's a rabbi. Oh, Winona Ryder's so good.
But yeah, so it's I think because she's so removed from this part of her identity, she feels that she can, she feels oh, it's not a big deal. And then when she realizes what's really happening, and even if she thinks she's as removed as possible from this identity, she's not. And she realizes this would affect her too. And then it's she understands. So I don't know what I really think about that, but that's just, I guess, something that I just realized.
I think she genuinely thinks she's acting in their best interest. I think when Sandy goes off to Kentucky, when she's relocating the family, I think she genuinely believes, because she believes her husband, that it's what's for the best. I think Bengelsdorf sends them to Homestead 42 because he's pissed off they didn't let Sandy come with him to the state dinner. But I think she is just a silly little girl. I really do. I actually felt sorry for her. I really kind of it was the only moment I didn't side with Bess. I really felt when her sister came home, she should have taken her in. But maybe I'm just a soft touch.
I think she was endangering the family, and I think that Bess had every right to say no. And family is family, but Bess has little children that she has to think about in the time that they're living. So I don't know. I think that she was right to turn Evelyn away if it meant protecting her family.
Yeah, and that's basically the, I think that's what the book is about, right? That for this family of 4 to survive, they've got to prioritize themselves. It's it's harsh. Okay, so maybe let's move from Evelyn to the wonderful, controversial Rabbi Bengelsdorf, played by the 100% Sicilian and yet always plays Jews, John Turturro. I think by now he's an honorary Jew. Where to begin with Bengelsdorf? when does the penny drop, if ever, for Bengelsdorf? Does Bengelsdorf think he's doing the right thing the whole way through?
I think he has to. Otherwise, like, why is he doing it? Unless he's not doing it to get ahead or to impress anybody. I don't think.
I think he realizes.
I don't know, but he has that story about the Confederate guy that like rose high in, the Jewish Confederate guy.
Judah P. Benjamin.
Yeah, I don't know.
Who dealt with his own discrimination back in the day as well.
I feel that Bengelsdorf is one of those guys who wants so desperately to be accepted that he doesn't stop to think whether those people are worthy of. Is their acceptance really something that you should strive for? So, oh my God, it's so amazing. You can be the second in command of the Confederate government.
Is he just a grown-up Seldon? Like he wants friends so bad?
I also
think he had a different view of like his Jewish people were not the like new wave immigrant. It was the older, he's been here for 200 years. He has a congregation. Like this is different from, like the more like Herman's people, I guess, even though they're all technically part of the same people.
Yeah. Again, I think there's huge analogies here. So I'll give you a great example. So David Simon made clear that there was like the first wave of Jewish immigrants from Germany. So they came from a country in Europe where they were already hugely liberal and assimilated. And then a lot of them did go to the South, and they were very kind of like within the economy. And then when the kind of the quote unquote, and this is so pejorative, so I hate to even use the phrase, but the shtetl Jews come from East Europe and Russia, and they are not assimilated in their countries at all. And then they come and they sort of settle on the East Coast and in New York. That the German Jewish first wave really looked down on them and thought of them as basically embarrassing. Like if they would see Orthodox Jews in full regalia, they would find that absolutely distasteful. And that therefore Bengelsdorf probably does have a very genuine mission that he does want them to assimilate, because he feels that they aren't getting all of the American experience that they could if only they were less paranoid and would mix with people. And to me...
Well, I'm just saying, like, his wave of Jewish immigrations comes from the Haskalah, which is like basically the Jewish Enlightenment, and so that's like where Reform Judaism was founded. So like and that Reform Judaism was founded on the idea like you need to assimilate into society, like that's why we keep getting kicked out of places and yada yada yada. So like he really is set in this idea like complete 100% assimilation, like that's the way to go. Like this is what we like. This is why we come to America. Like the Haskalah is basically like we need to get rid of our old conservative ways. They're not working. Like they're causing people to hate us, and like so he really is in that belief that like they need to reform as much as possible.
But then the category error that I get why he would think that, although I don't think it's forgivable, but I would get why he would think that about the ultra Orthodox Jews. But why would you think that about the residents of of like New Jersey who are, they don't even keep a kosher, they're just running, they're just participating in an American life like any other immigrant group, just like the Irish, just like the Italians, like anyone else. I mean, like
keeping Shabbos, like they're still doing things that other them, and they live in these insulated communities still. Like I grew up in a very Jewish area, like Jews travel in packs, and so he wants to like separate them and get them, integrated into all of American society. Like their Jews aren't farmers, Jews aren't, yada yada yada. So he wants them to be American, not like people who are continuously like living in the same communities.
But what does American mean, though?
Exactly.
That's the whole.
That was me shouting at the TV screen, like we're all fucking American, motherfucker. Like, that's what.
Dean is not even an American.
I'm like, the whole point of America is you can come from anywhere and be American, and you bring your experience, and you are not forced to become like some fake plastic version of a WASP to be American. Fuck you. I was getting so angry watching this.
There's always been the side of
Right.
You're not American unless you assimilate. Yeah. I mean, that going back to the original nativist movement in like the 1840s, like that's always been
right. Whether you're Jewish or Catholic, you're answering to someone else rather than the president or your government or America.
But also the sects of Judaism are so segregated from one. Like they not like hate each other.
I thought you were going in a total different direction.
SECTS, Matt?
Yeah.
that's the stuff.
Filthy
So,
mind,
like,
Matt.
in
Sorry.
Judaism, like when you think of like, you know, like Orthodox Jews, you know, they're wearing like the like shteimel or like whatever, and like got the like black coat and like the payas and everything. Like most Jews, like non-Orthodox Jews, really look down on them. Whereas like I would say like a lot of like non-Jewish people are like, whatever, these people exist. But like Reform Jews are like, these people are shaming us, like they're an embarrassment, like they're what people think bad things about Jews. And so like within Judaism, the different sects often have like a lot of issues with one another. So I can see
Yeah. We have that too,
reasons-
honestly. Like
Yes.
I totally get this because my family are East African Asians. Why do we have this separate designation from Indians? Because the Indians who went to East Africa in the 1920s when the British owned East Africa have been assimilated and liberal and speaking English and living under English law for a century. So by the time they actually came to England in 1960, they slotted right in. They were more English than the English. And then you got the waves of immigrants coming direct from India in like the 60s and 70s and 80s, even to now. And they don't speak English and they don't understand rule of law. And it's kind of embarrassing because they have thick accents and they're working class where we're all educated. And the language with which you hear East African Indians speaking about Indian Indians and the pejorative, it's so appalling. And I was actually thinking to myself watching this, like, if this were to happen in England, how many like well-to-do, assimilated, rich East African Asians would be saying, yeah, I think all these kind of like Indians, freshies as they call them, fresh off the boat, it's so pejorative. Let's break them out of their little insular ghetto. Well, they wouldn't use the word ghetto, but this little insular communities in Birmingham and Leeds, and let's send them to, why don't they all go and live in the villages and learn what it's like to be really English? You could just see it happening. In the words of Sinclair Lewis, it couldn't happen here. I think it could. And again, it's just so clever to play off community versus community. And it's all about waves of immigration and how socially superior you feel within the context of social insecurity. Like you wouldn't care about that so much if there wasn't a genuine insecurity as an immigrant. So it really translated to me.
That's what they say, like, was the majority, like the rise of like Ku Klux Klan and stuff like that, is because no matter what, like you could be the poorest white man in the world, but you could still look down on the slave, like a slave or black person. And when that was taken away, they had to lash out in some other way. Like, I think it's just kind of human nature that you want to feel superior to something. So you
separate yourself from them, right? So, just because they speak with a heavy accent and broken English, please don't forget that I went to an Ivy League university and I'm your doctor and I'm professional, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly that Bengelsdorf. Well, he speaks 10 languages and he rides a horse.
Where was he riding a horse in New York City?
At least he's not a Yankees fan, right, guys?
Hey, what the fuck?
John Turturro. I love how we've got.
My point is, it's just sort of transferred, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Every time he spoke, all I could think of was the chicken commercial from BoJack Horseman. Like, he sounds just like the guy that did the chicken commercial. And I checked IMDb, and he was not the guy that did the chicken commercial. So,
which is surprising because BoJack had so many celebrity cameos. It wouldn't have been surprising if he were.
No, he did the same accent as he did in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Yeah.
That was more of a Savannah, more like molasses rolling off of your tongue.
Damn, Greg.
That's quoting Michael Scott from The Office from Murder in Savannah.
You sounded like Shelby Foote, the historian who's in.
He's from Alabama. That's more his neck of the woods, not South Carolina.
That's what I should do with all my accents. I should be like, I'm just doing Michael Scott doing that accent. It's fine.
Well, I'm not sure we really need to spend much time talking about Philip, but do you guys want to talk about Sandy a little bit?
Sandy was a real dick.
Played by Caleb Malice. But is he a dick? I mean, like, I think it's hard for us to remember how Charles Lindbergh was really a boy's own hero.
Yeah, well, they talk about that too. That guy on the porch is like, just remember, like, we were all cheering Lindbergh 20 years ago when he, crossed the Atlantic. Like, he is America's sweetheart, her hero.
In defense of Sandy, I really, really appreciated when they were driving through Klan territory. And he saw the car and he just hopped into the back seat and was like, let me make this kid not have to look at his dead mom. And I was like, my heart goes out to you. You are a hero. Everything that you've done in the past is forgiven because you helped a child. And any character that is nice to a child automatically becomes the best character in my life.
That's fair. Like, I don't think I would have understood that when I was his age. Like, I would have been like, oh, cool, look at the car.
No, I think Sandy, he gets old before his time, doesn't he? And I think the whole even volunteering to go on that journey is him trying to get redemption. He knows he's fucked up. And short of saying, as Herman says to his wife, I made a mistake, Sandy never says that, but by going on this journey, he's showing his family, I know what I did.
It was the
but I don't think he made a mistake. He was manipulated, basically. Like, I mean, he's young. He was like 15 by the end of the show, so he had been like 13. At the beginning, he's young. He's impressionable. Like, he's basically manipulated.
They didn't have the internet.
I can't fault him. It's the like, and also it's just part of being a teenager. Like my brother, he literally would just disagree with anything. Like when we were in high school, he would just disagree with anything my parents said because my parents would push so hard for like their beliefs, and so he would just to be contrarian, he'd be like, actually, no, I don't think that.
I was that way too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
so
I remember the edgelords in high school being like, Jesus was gay and he slept with all the disciples. Like just like, at church group, just to be a shit. And people are like, how could you say that? And I'm like, they're fucking with you, dude. Just let it go.
Yeah, like we were out to dinner with my parents once, like right after Trump got elected, and like I think my brother had to have been like 18 or 19, and he's like, he didn't vote, but he's like, and my parents were like just ranting about Trump, and my brother was like, if I had voted, I would have voted for Trump, and my parents just were like, what? And he's like, obviously he just said that to like get a rise out of them, and so like obviously Sandy's not trying to get a rise, but like
and then he put his sunglasses on.
Yeah, of course. Like teenagers just want to be
lit a cigarette.
Yeah. Like they just, but also though Sandy was manipulated by Evelyn. She was like, knowingly or not, she was basically like trying to turn him against his own parents. And
but I think that's another case where Evelyn being older makes that more forgivable, because I think Evelyn is a woman who doesn't have kids and her sister does, and it's kind of a way of bonding with them. Like she almost gets the son in Sandy, right? Which I think Bess sees very quickly through, which makes it a little bit more forgivable to me. I think you're right.
For sure.
The
front half of this series, I think she definitely thinks Sandy's like her boy as much as Bess's boy.
And she's doing a nice thing. Like if she's going to a White House dinner, it's a huge privilege. And for genuinely in her heart, her first question is, can I take my nephew? And it's not to try and impress people with him. She wants to have this nice thing for him. I genuinely think that was an earnest request.
It's just, yeah, exactly. It's like, I feel, it's like when you see videos of like the Westboro Baptist Church and you see their little children like holding signs that they don't even know what it means. And it's like, you just feel bad for them. Like you don't think the kids are bad people because they don't know. And like, I think it's the same with Sandy is like, he doesn't realize exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I think that what kind of gets me, I mean, there are a couple of decisions in the show / book that don't sit well with me. Making Anne-Marie Lindbergh the good person pisses me off. But the other thing that is, so Sandy does all this stuff, which is basically fairly horrific, but kind of he ends up back in sympathy with his family. And I kind of feel that with little Philip, like he does this one total kid thing, which is so understandable, which is, I don't want to do that. Can't you send that annoying whiny kid from next door to do it? And then his punishment, because he really finds Seldon annoying, and who wouldn't? Seldon is fucking annoying. And then it's kind of like at the end of the show, at least, Seldon is still living with him, and he kind of like creeps over to Philip and puts his arm around him for sympathy, and Philip just sits there and cries into his knees. And you think, the punishment for Philip, poor Philip, who did this one thing wrong, is now he's stuck with Seldon forever. I felt so bad for Philip.
That scene, I thought that was Seldon comforting Philip. Like I thought it was that when that happened, it was.
Did you think that Philip wanted Seldon to comfort him?
No.
I don't know. I thought that by the end, Philip kind of like understood he did a shitty thing.
Oh no, he gets he did a shitty thing. He still doesn't want to hang out with him. Like I can get that I wronged you and still not want to hang out with you. And I think that whereas in the book, that at some point months later, Seldon's going to get shipped off to his aunt in Brooklyn. The way the show ends is kind of like, that's it. They now have a third son living in that house, and it's fucking Seldon Wish now.
Well, they talk about sending him to his aunt, so like.
Yeah, maybe he's got an aunt in Brooklyn. Yeah. Anyway, that was just something that tickled me. Do we want to talk about any of the political characters, like Walter Winchell seen largely off screen, even Charles Lindbergh basically seen off screen? We see more of Admiral Lindbergh. How do you like that as a choice? How do you like the way in which they handle the politics?
It was like 4 episodes before we saw the actor that played Lindbergh.
Well, you see him start of episode 2 when Sandy goes to see the speech, but that's really like for 2 seconds. And then you see him at the end of that episode when Bengelsdorf is endorsing him, but you never really see him. It's more the wife, isn't it, in the White House, one-on-one. Because once Lindbergh's got what he needs, he just keeps a distance from the Jew.
Isn't the
and they don't want us to
they don't want us
to empathize with him.
Oh, maybe. I thought the whole point of the show was to show this, like, one family's, activities underneath with everything else outside, happening. So, like, even though Charles Lindbergh's a big driver of what's happening on the outside, he's not actually, directly involved with
They did address that on the podcast, that, like, they were very strict that the only perspectives they could have as point of view was that, their family characters and then Alvin. Like, that was it. So if something didn't happen when they were around, it just didn't happen on screen.
I mean, I thought it was effective because it really makes it a family story, and you just see the impacts on everyday life. Like, you don't need to spend time or a lot of time with Henry Ford being a dickhead. You just see the impact in that hotel in Washington, D.C. Like the chilling line when the hotel desk guy says, "And we won't worry about the bar of soap that was taken," as if they were thieves. And like the little details.
How off-putting that was to me. Did you guys ever read *Handmaid's Tale* when she goes into the coffee shop and he's like, "You fucking slut" or "whore" or something like that, and it's just like, whoa, like, where did that come from? Like, that takes a certain, I get it. Like, you're working a job, but you have to also believe in something to actively kick someone out of their hotel room and say something as off-putting as like, "Oh, we won't like get you for the missing bar of soap." Like, it was oh my god, like, it's very upsetting.
And wasn't there a little more in the book, from what I remember, of the guy who gave them their tour, Mr. was it Anderson? I forget his name. Didn't we get some more backstory from him about why he had to leave got kicked out of his like college professor job, or am I completely misremembering that?
Yeah, no, you're right.
I think you are correct.
Yeah,
with Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Taylor, yeah, because he was one of my. I just loved how he kind of defended them, and like, he was like the good American who you try to defend him a little bit from the ignorance people around him.
But it's so chilling, like that whole episode in Washington. I was tense from start to finish because I was so invested in Bess by that side and really wanted. I was so angry with Herman of not taking them to Canada. And so even when they get lost and the policemen come up, I think, oh my God, they're going to get beaten up by the police. No, but they do get to the hotel and you're like, okay, fine. And then when the tour guide, I'm like, is he FBI? Because Alvin, like, what's going on? I was so nervous. And then he turns out to be the good guy. And even when they go to get Seldon and they go to the Kentucky family and you think, oh shit, are they going to, when they drive off with Seldon, are they going to immediately call the Klan?
Right.
But no, they don't, because actually the whole point about it couldn't, quote unquote, it couldn't happen here, or these kinds of alt fictions is the majority of people can still be good if a motivated bunch of arseholes want to take over the country. And it's important that you do see at different points that people are good. It's just that, what can you do when a small bunch of people with arms and burning crosses take over?
Something I thought was wild about the Klan scenes was the fact that when the store was burning, the police were just like chilling with the Klan people, like, yeah, like how see the game on Friday.
Welcome to the South.
What's up?
That's the tragedy of Herman. He's like, yeah, call the police, and he is just like my dad would be, raised voice, tiny guy, try and be domineering. Call the police, motherfuckers. I've got rights. And the police are like, just move along here. Don't make a hassle. We're not on your side. We're not on the side of the little guy. It's so scary. I found this whole series so petrifying, and it gave me nightmares. And we had to watch like light, sort of normal TV afterwards before I could go to sleep because it was so effective.
Yeah, we call that the palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly.
The Parks and Rec or The Office or 30 Rock or something that.
So we would watch an episode on a Saturday night and then time it to finish for Match of the Day, which is like this iconic British like soccer discussion show.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
But there's no football matches happening at the moment, so they've just turned it into this like Zoom call between the presenters where they take the piss out of each other and show like comedy clips from soccer of past ages, and that's perfect. And then you go to bed and you kind of only semi have nightmares.
Well, that's one of the things, like why I like alternate history and stories like this, is that it's fun to have a story about the South winning the Civil War, or about, alternate president. But it's the little things, like the little scenes, like you talked about, like the scene in the South or the scene at dinner, like that really can have power. And you couldn't have had those scenes if it wasn't in this like fake history. A lot of history people like I've tried to recommend alternate history books to like customers of mine that are, oh, you're reading a history here, you might give this a shot. A lot of them are like, oh, I'm not going to read that. Like, well, why bother, But I think there's something that can be taken out of it, is you can be humanized more, and plus it's a cool story. Like I talked about it years
cool
ago.
Story. Yeah.
Like I call it getting like the alternate history chills. Like when I think of like what might have been. There's a quote by Dante Alighieri, like, "Look into my eyes, my name is." I can't quote now. "Look into my eyes, my name is might have been." And there's a whole poem that comes after that. But like I just get chills thinking about that kind of stuff. About like
it's called the Inferno.
Yeah, I don't know if that's. No, not Dante Alighieri. Dante Gabriele Rossetti. Apologies. Different Italian. But no, I just like this kind of stuff, and I feel like it gets looked down on by the literary folk sometimes. And there's been a lot of literary authors writing alternate history, in the last decade or couple decades. And some of them have been great books, but some of them have feels like they're slumming it and they get back to writing regular stuff.
Yeah, I feel like George has actually commented on this on one of his blog posts, like where it's like, okay, so the Confederates won the war, and the alternate history is everything's the same except we're flying Confederate flags.
Yeah.
And it can be, I think, a very cheap way out, but
depends on the author. Harry Turtledove wrote a very brilliant 12-book series on if the South won the Civil War, but it was the next 100 years of history was the U.S. living alongside the Confederate States, like it was literally a divided country, and how that played out over World War I, where.
Can we get back, because there's one big issue we have yet to discuss, which is the ending. So for the reader, the listener who has borne with us through this and somehow miraculously hasn't watched the show or the book, what happens in the book is that, having committed to the concept of writing the book just from the point of view of the little boy, so only what's in his field of vision, which David Simon widens out to what is in the field of vision of the family, you then in the book have this very weird sort of chapter, penultimate chapter, where it's all basically done in the manner of news reports. So you get this very compressed history. So, Lindbergh goes missing. Walter Winchell runs against Lindbergh. Winchell is assassinated. Lindbergh goes to go and speak to the crowds. He's lost in his plane. Henry Ford and the real ultra-Nazis stage a coup. They imprison Anne Morrow Lindbergh in a mental asylum. They arrest Bengelsdorf, and they really now are going to crack down on the Jews hardcore. Anne Morrow Lindbergh gets out of prison, goes on the radio every hour on the hour, calling for peace, calling for the National Guard to stand down, calling for a new election. And this is where the book and the TV show diverge. So in the book, the election is called, FDR wins, Pearl Harbor happens, and basically America reconverges with its true history after this nightmare year or so. And so it almost feels like a fever dream that was solved by a man going missing. And it's almost unreal, like, did the country really learn anything? And then you proceed as you were. Whereas in the show, and David Simon calculated that the show would be released in an election year, he didn't want to let the American viewing public off the hook. He wanted to leave them with the election and say, right, now you cast your ballot as if this election were as important as Henry Ford versus FDR. So that's why, as we leave this show, you lean into the radio and you don't know who's going to win. And also, just to muddy the water, you've seen ballots being stolen. So is the election even fair? So that's a provocative ending. But you don't then have the comfort and the safety of America being restored to a glorious future. He leaves you ambiguous as to which way it could go. Okay.
So can we ask Matt first? Because Matt is the only one who has not read the book at all, right? Because us. So Matt, what did you think of the ending? Just from how pleased were you? Like, did you understand it? Did you like it?
I understood it. in the fact that what I thought Evelyn was saying was true.
So okay.
I thought she was redoing, like, she was giving like the inside scoop of like a radio announcement that would happen later. It scared the shit out of me because it probably looks like we're going to depend on a lot of mail-in voting, a lot of paper voting. The United States this election season. So seeing ballots just set on fire was off-putting. I think that because of social distancing, there will be long lines to vote, and people will be turned away for petty little clerical errors like there were to the black folks in the show. It really scared the shit out of me. It was really a powerful ending. I liked it because it was so powerful. I obviously did not like how it made me feel. Did I answer your question? I feel like I just rambled.
No, that's
a good answer.
I just think that shines a light on the fact that it was still a good show with a great ending, but the average viewer, no pun intended, thought that the whole Lindbergh baby thing was real. Right? I did too.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't think it was
Just,
real.
I thought that's what they were proposing, which
so
was confusing.
saying it didn't do a good job, it did just as a confusing job as the book, I think.
Yeah, they probably just shouldn't have included it, honestly, because I just thought it was reconfirming.
Well, I think they must have thought that having the Canadians, recruit Alvin, and then having the newspaper, and basically that was like mission accomplished. We're the ones that did this, not the Germans. I think they must have thought like that came through really clear.
But it didn't because
I
was confused because it seems like nothing happened. I didn't know if they were there to shoot him down, just to track him, just to like shoot a laser beam at him.
One of many people set up to do that.
I got that.
Right?
Yeah, I got that, but I was like, he was there for 2 seconds. They were like, all right, we're here. 5 seconds later, time to go. We're done.
I think he was supposed to have been there like all night, but it seemed like, he turned it on and they were like, oh, nope, we're good.
Well, like one of the things that they used for airplanes for navigation, like especially in World War II for the bombing runs on England, were these like radio frequencies that would guide the bomber directly to the target. And what England was trying to do was scramble them or jam them or, divert them so they'd bomb somewhere else.
Isn't that the plot of that?
Abby, what did you think of the ending?
I thought it was handled much better than in the book, because in the book, like you said, it's just one final chapter that's like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Whereas in the show, even though it was all in one episode, it was a lot more gradual, and because you had the advantage of seeing from different perspectives, it just kind of like maybe I can't think of the word, like exacerbated the intensity of the anti-Semitism. Because when I actually read the book, I was like, not that many bad things happened. Like, yeah, they got threatened with like relocation and stuff, but like there wasn't that much. Like, I was like, oh, it's a blip in the radar. Whereas in the
even
show,
the journey to rescue Seldon isn't that bad, right? Because they don't actually come into contact with the clan. The worst thing about coming back is that the car just breaks down 4 times and the dad gets sepsis. Because the fight with Alvin's happened first, so he's got injuries that are still recovering.
No.
Yeah. So I thought that the show handled it in a way that was like much more I don't know, just like much more realistic maybe, or like just much more gripping, and like made me feel more, I guess.
I mean, seeing Pittsburgh burning on the horizon was puts it all into perspective. I just wished, because I went into the show going, okay, I'm finally going to get the ending of the book explained to me. And I left feeling exactly the same.
Okay, well, for all of you out there who are like very angry about this,
I'm not angry. I was just it was still a great show.
Listen to the episode 6 podcast, the official Hbo podcast, and then you will have some light shone on.
I like how our podcast is like, just listen to this other podcast.
Yeah, honestly.
Listen to all these other podcasts that explain this so much better.
Yeah, no. I mean, I completely agree with you, Abby. Like, when I read the book, especially coming off the show, I was shocked at the whole, like, what was the point of, if you were going to then have all these, like, newspaper reports and show us what was really happening in Washington in the corridors of power, why couldn't we have seen that all along? But if you were just going to make it family, keep it family. I just felt like Philip Roth kind of gave up, chickened out. He had a sort of, George R. and Martin writer's block, because he realized he'd written himself into a position where he couldn't really explain the coup from the point of view of the family, and was like, fuck it, I'm just going to put in some like news reports and then have a big rescue of Seldon that takes way too little time and isn't scary enough, and then come home. So I'm with you on that. And I think the ending to me is clear, but to me this really does seem like a Jaime Cersei having sex in the crypt scene where I think they thought they were doing one thing that was very clear and then they were not doing it. So maybe it failed. HBO, goddamn you, why doesn't someone watch these shows and give you a test
They're like,
screening?
What do you mean that was a problem? It was super clear.
They need to get
She said yes,
test
like 10
audiences. They need to get some test audiences at HBO, man.
Yeah,
and-
I think they definitely could have made that clear if that's what the intent was, and it wouldn't have been hard.
Yeah, or maybe just drop it like you say. Although I like it because I think it shows Evelyn being unhinged. The way she sort of conspiratorially whispers it, and you think, "Fucking hell, she's a Fruit Loop." That was my interpretation.
Yeah, but she was on the inside of she was married to I don't know what his role was officially, but like she's at the White House. She's friends
like
with
the
the
spokesperson or something.
The
Jewish
Rasputin,
liaison.
the Jewish Rasputin.
Yeah.
But then he was like, his official position, I think, was like literally like the spokesperson for Lindbergh. He was like,
Wasn't he officially the
Yeah.
head of the OAA, the Office for the
Yeah.
the whatever of the whatever?
American assimilation.
Because he came up with Just Folks and Homestead
but
42,
then why
right?
was he giving all the press conferences?
Because
Well,
she
my other
asked
thing
him
I-
to.
Didn't get is like, why do people care so much what the first? I don't mean this as like I'm a man. Like, why was the first lady like? Shouldn't they be going to the vice president and the secretary of state like in the succession? Like, why did she hold so much sway? Is it just because they were celebrities before he was elected? Like,
If
you know,
yeah, and if she was in prison, and they were like, oh, she's gone mental, and like
no, even
that's
before
kind of
that.
a-
I mean,
a
like,
big
why
part
were
of
they
it.
even? Why was the press hanging out Anne Morrow just because it was her husband that was missing? I guess.
Well, I
was more
suppose
of
in those days,
It's-
Eleanor Roosevelt was very sort of. She was one of the most
That's
powerful
true.
first ladies, wasn't she? So.
different times.
I mean, bear in mind the Lindbergh. If I'm trying to think if I'm remembering this correctly now from the book, I think the Lindbergh baby story is told to Evelyn, may or may not be via the rabbi, but from Anne Morrow Lindbergh. But I think it's just arse covering. Like her Nazi husband is dead, and now she has to arse cover.
Well, the other thing I couldn't understand is how could they not find the plane at all? It's the president of the United States. Like they would have
Bermuda
found it.
Triangle.
Yeah, over the Blue Ridge Mountains, I guess.
This is
But-
Yeah.
Carol
I don't
Baskin
know.
all over again. Okay, this is Carol Baskin's husband all over again.
He put sardine oil on his shoes or something, and a tiger ate him. Done.
And then you can
For
argue,
the
is
record, I
this the
don't
narrow
think he's
hips
more
of
Carol
George R.R. Martin? So should he have had the plane be downed and the body found? Like I think in that final compressed chapter, he was trying to be too clever, and he has caused himself historical pain. And he's got the worst of all worlds, right? Because the right-wing people think that he has besmirched the reputation of Lindbergh, and Lindbergh only ever went to Germany on behalf of the U.S. government, and he wasn't really an anti-Semite. And then people like me are like, you're now basically giving white supremacists a cop-out of how Lindbergh wasn't really anti-Semitic. You're giving him a get-out-of-jail-free card.
The narrow hips of George R. R.
Where
Martin is my
was it that he
favorite
was
author
going?
fan
Was it-
fiction.
Was he was flying like to D.C. and Kentucky, right, and then flying back?
Hmm.
He was flying his plane. He was flying the Spirit of St. Louis.
Yeah,
so it
I
was
mean,
like
he
an
could-
old plane. Yeah.
He could easily have a plane could easily have gone down like in the mountainous region there and not be found for
I'm saying,
a
but
long
it's like
time.
the president of the United States. They would pull out every stop to like find the body and the plane. You know.
No, yeah,
yeah.
they would, but like with what they had at the time, like they would assume a flight path, and if he
But
went,
if you
like,
believe
a
the Henry
small bit
Ford,
off of it,
so what
But-
is the plot against America, right? Is the plot against America Lindbergh becoming elected, or is it the coup by Burton K. Wheeler and Henry Ford?
That's
If
the
you-
whole point.
If you believe that that is the plot against America, then they wouldn't find the plane because they have downed it, not the Canadians or the
And
British
maybe
or
they
Lindbergh and
left it up
accent,
to
and
the
they don't
government.
they don't want it to be discovered because then they'll be seen that they basically fucked around with the plane and had him down because they wanted to have America go into the war on the side of Hitler. They wanted to go beyond neutrality, so they
so
got
are you
rid of
thinking
Lindbergh.
that it wasn't Canadians, it was Americans.
See,
I mean,
this is
that
too
got
complicated. That can't be it. The plot against America is the fact that what makes more sense, that secondary plot within a plot in the last 20 pages of a book, or the fact that the Nazis elected a president. Like, that's the plot against America. It has to be. Otherwise, I'm a fucking idiot. And I may be an idiot, but it seems like Matt's an idiot with me.
I'm an idiot regardless, man.
Well, if that is truly the case, which I don't think Philip Roth thinks it is. I think he's meant to put that out as a conspiracy theory. Then
Roth
I'm
doesn't think I'm an idiot.
then I'm very
That's
pissed
awesome.
off.
Death of the author.
I'm
Death
pissed
of the
off.
author, okay?
I'm pissed off.
Well, but I thought the implication was that they definitely helped Lindbergh get elected. I mean, it wasn't even really hidden, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know
Guys,
how
I gotta
much they
take off.
would have
It
done.
was a
But
good time.
Bye. I mean,
Bye,
let's
Matt.
be clear.
Thanks,
Let's be clear. It is not. The Nazis can do plenty to help Lindbergh get elected without stealing his baby and blackmailing him.
Also, that would have been a very long game they were playing because that was like 10, 15 years earlier, right?
I don't
It's
think.
like 1934, 30. Oh, maybe.
right. Yeah, no, that doesn't necessarily mean they had the baby or whatever. I'm just saying, like, they definitely were working with him and working to keep him
Okay,
in
I
power,
found the
give him power.
sentence. So the way it's described in the book, as an epilogue, Philip's aunt Evelyn confides the theory of Lindbergh's disappearance, the source for which was First Lady Anne Morrow, who disclosed it to Bengelsdorf shortly before she was removed from the White House. Philip admits that Aunt Evelyn's theory is the most far-fetched and, quote, unbelievable, but not necessarily the least convincing explanation for Lindbergh's disappearance. So basically, Philip Roth is leaving it open for us. Either you can be sensible and believe that Lindbergh was a Nazi, or if you want to kind of be an apologist, you can take this cop-out, which is so ludicrous, I'm going to judge you for it. And I think Philip Roth and I am shocked anyone has gone for that.
See, I took it as Lindbergh was a Nazi, and also he was being blackmailed by the Nazis.
Say basically you are naturally a Nazi, like you're naturally a white supremacist and an anti-Semite, which he clearly was. And then basically the Nazis say, by the way, we've got your kid. Wouldn't that make you not be a Nazi anymore? Because you'd be like, fucking hell, just give me my kid back. Don't be a dick,
I don't know. I
Maybe
mean,
he
we're just gonna raise him. He's just gonna be our ward.
Yeah, he's the Theon of the Germany.
Yeah. Anyway,
It's just a way to unite our great houses.
all I would say is, Greg, have you read the book It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis?
Yes.
I'm just going to say that I'd be really interested to see how you think it compares to this one, because they're kind of telling the same sort of alt history, but I feel It Can't Happen Here is better thought through and is more faithful to the concept and doesn't launch any cockamamie conspiracy theories.
It doesn't, but it has that same weird ending where it's like all the bad stuff happens, but then like they make it better. It gets really bad really fast, and then things get back to normal again. Or as close to normal as they can be. But no, I like that book much better because I wasn't as confused by the end of it. And there were a lot of scenes in this and from the book that were, very reminiscent of that book also.
Okay.
But what are your thoughts?
Similar. I mean, it's not. I think it's much better. It's much funnier. It's much more satirical. It's much more nakedly political. It's not hamstrung by telling it all as a domestic story, so you're just straight into the heart of things, which I kind of prefer.
Was that president? What's the guy's name in that? He had a really Hazalius. What was the president's name? Do you remember? He had a funny name.
Oh, not Windrup, the one before, because there's
Windrip.
Windrip.
I think it was Windrip. Yeah. Anyway, welcome.
Oh,
to
that's
Greg
it. Senator Basilius Buzz Windrip.
Basilius Windrip. There we go. He can't be a Nazi. His name is Buzz Windrip. I think that was supposed to be a book club that I did, and then I didn't do it.
But if you do that, I'll reread it, because I think that, from memory, that was a great film. Great show. That should become a TV show. That would be really good.
Well, probably they're not ever going to do any more alternate history, modern political stuff, unless this spurns a whole new interest in it. Who knows?
I'm kind of braver to write that in 1935 when it was still happening, rather than in 2004.
Well, he was writing that. I mean, Sinclair Lewis wrote that because he thought Huey Long was going to be the next great, danger to American society coming from the far left. And then he got assassinated, so it didn't happen.
Oh, Christ alive. Okay. Well, we've lost Matt. We've lost Abby. Does anyone else have anything else to say about this show and film? I am so keen to hear from the listener. Listener, tell us what you thought about the ending, because have I got it right, or have Matt and Greg got it right?
I'm pretty sure we're wrong, but I just don't want to think of.
Tell us what happened.
Tell us what. Maybe we should run a poll. What do you think happens in the end? I think it is genuinely a failure, though, on the part of the author when it's so ambiguous, unless he thinks it should be that ambiguous.
But Philip Roth, his strength
happened by smashing the subscribe button.
Yeah. Just the thing about Philip Roth, he is a master of American modern literature, and his strength from the books, couple that I've read, and like his reputation is big ideas, big thing. Like he writes about sex and lust and like the modern American, the modern man and his, like, so it's about the ideas. So he still got through a lot of that stuff in this book, if the plot wasn't perfect, I guess. Like, I loved The Human Stain. I liked, what's the other one he wrote about polio, Nemesis, which was really great. This book he didn't stick the landing, but it's still like, for a established author to be like, I'm going to write an alternate history novel, like he probably got laughed out of his editor's room the first time he told him that.
You see, until you guys was chatting about this on Skype, I didn't realize that alt history was this sort of like looked down upon subgenre. I thought it was perfectly respectable.
How many like?
I also didn't realize that it was sci-fi. I thought it was.
What is it if it's not sci-fi? It's not just fiction, because
to me it's like when you write historical fiction, right, which is sort of based on history but imagined. I kind of felt it was more like historical fiction or anti.
Maybe I've been reading fiction this whole time. I don't know. But,
I don't know.
I have tried to get a lot of customers who read history to read like, How Few Remain, or even, classics like For Want of a Nail or Lest Darkness Fall, and they're all like, oh, I don't want to read that. Like, they want to read real history books. And like Harry Turtledove is a grandmaster of science fiction. He's not a winner of the National Book Award. So,
if you have any good, I'm into the alt history right now, especially 20th century alt history. So if you have any good recommendations, Greg, send them over. Have a lovely evening, boys and girls. We hope you enjoyed The Plot Against America. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Obviously, listen to the far more professional HBO version. And, we should probably end by saying that there's another alt history book called Pavan, which is set in the English Civil War that Greg told me about.
That's my favorite book. That's one of my all-time favorites. Yes.
Exactly. And it's set in the village, or partly set in the village, where my father-in-law lives. And it's really great. And I loved it. And Greg recommended it. So...
Do not grieve for the deaths of stones. It's one of my favorite lines from a book, and it only makes sense if you read the book.
Who's the author, Greg, again, so we can recommend?
Keith Roberts for that one.
Yeah, Keith Roberts, Pavan, Pavane. You guys should check it out because that's really.
You can buy it on our website. Our virtual bookstore is up and running. SouthamptonSagHarborBooks.com. Free shipping.
Within the United States.
If someone really wants a book in England, I'll make sure it gets them.
And what else do you have on there, like board games? What lockdown goodies do you have on that?
Oh, we got everything. I mean, we got 5,000 books, toys, games, puzzles. Puzzles are selling like crazy. So
do you have new Star Wars geeky Lego?
We just got some new ones. We sold out of the Millennium Falcon, but we just got the little Mandalorians, which are nice, and I got a Poe Dameron X-Wing, which is pretty cool. So.
Cool. Excellent. Well, check out Southampton Sag Harbor Books.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe and healthy. Bye, everyone.
Later.